Hey guys, Garrett back for Sableye the Mind Sculptor with another card discussion video. So today we are going to be looking at Hour of Promise. Hour of Promise is a 4 and a green sorcery that says search your library for up to 2 land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, then if you control 2 or more deserts, put 2/2/2 zombies into the battlefield. So this card is huge because it does not specify basic lands. You can get any land that you want. Now, obviously, the implications of this are pretty crazy. In Modern, for instance, you could fetch up 2 Tron lands, although I don't think Tron needs that, especially not at 5 mana. And in Standard, we've seen a whole bunch of crazy new deserts spoiled recently. Now, we're not going to be talking about new spoilers today, apart from Hour of Promise, but be aware that there are a lot of cards that make this stronger in the new set. So first, let's just look at the deserts that are already in Standard from Amonkhet. We've got Grasping Dunes, which can be sacrificed to put neg-1/neg-1 counters on creatures. So getting 2 of these can be nice because it lets you threaten bigger creatures. And then we got Sun-Scorched Desert, which will let you deal 1 damage when it enters the battlefield. And I would run a couple of these just for reach in Hour of Promise decks, because it is very annoying to get stuck on 1 or 2 health and not have any way to burn them out and just get killed. So having a Sun-Scorched Desert can help keep that from happening. So now let's look at the other utility lands currently in Standard. We've got Blighted Woodland, which is basically explosive vegetation on a land. You can pay 3 and a green to sack it and search the library for 2 lands. And then we've got Blighted Fen, which is a edict effect on a land. You can pay 4 and a black and sack it to make an opponent sacrifice a creature. These are both a little bit mana intensive, but I think they're nice as like 1 or 2 ofs in Hour of Promise decks, just to be able to have that threat, to be able to pull up your 1 Blighted Fen, for instance, if they're playing Ormondal, or pull up your couple of Blighted Woodlands if you have the extra mana and would like to ramp with it. Then there are the basic utility cards that I think should just go in most decks running Hour of Promise. We've got Gyrereach Sanitarium, which is a land that allows you to loot. It can be very useful in some situations, not as useful in others. Perfect card to go in a tutor package because of that. Next, we have Seagate Wreckage, which lets you draw cards as long as your hand is empty. Again, situational, so good for a tutor package. And Mirror Pool, which is an interesting inclusion, I think, because it is a bad land. I'm not gonna skirt around that at all. It enters tapped, it only adds colorless, but it has some great utility abilities. So if you only have 1 or 2 in your deck, you're not likely to draw them, and you can grab them with your Hours of Promise, and then they're already going to enter tapped, so you just get this great utility land basically for free. A few more lands. These are kind of deck-specific ones that I think could be good. First, we've got Westvale Abbey, which is a land that'll turn into a big dude, but only if you sacrifice 5 little dudes. This is, of course, good in go-wide style decks, which maybe not the best thing with Hour of Promise, but I have made go-wide ramp decks myself, so I can see this being used. Inventor's Fair is a land that gains you life as long as you have artifacts, and will also let you search for an artifact as long as you have enough artifacts already. Again, maybe not the best with Hour of Promise, but still a possibility. And Handweaver Battlements, which is a haste enabler land that can also meld with other creatures. I don't think I'd run this just as a haste enabler unless I had some specific reason that I needed to give creatures haste really badly, but it could be interesting in some sort of green-red Handweaver the Writhing Township deck, which could be a thing, maybe? I don't know. So then there are 2 decks that I thought could actually be viable that would use this, and the first one was Drownyard Temple and the Gitrog Monster. The Gitrog Monster lets you draw extra cards every turn, and it lets you play extra lands. The downside, of course, is that you only draw cards when lands hit the graveyard, and you have to sacrifice lands every turn. So Drownyard Temple goes pretty perfectly with a Gitrog Monster because you can pay 3 to return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. So the Gitrog Monster sacks a Drownyard Temple, you draw a card, you can pay 3 to return the Drownyard Temple, and the Gitrog Monster will never eat through your entire land base. I thought this would be good with Hour of Promise because you can fetch up your Drownyard Temples with your Hour of Promise and be able to sacrifice them, and also Hour of Promise is just nice additional ramp in this kind of deck. And lastly, the deck that we are going to be looking at today relies on Sanctum of Ugin and Temple of the Forsaken Gods. So Sanctum of Ugin is a land that lets you search for colorless creatures whenever you play a big Eldrazi. Temple of the Forsaken Gods is a land that lets you add extra mana as long as you have enough lands, and as long as you're using that mana to play an Eldrazi. Temple of the Forsaken Gods takes a lot of lands and has a lot of extra requirements, but after playing an Hour of Promise, and if you make your land drop next turn, you can actually play a Ulamog on turn 6 with the amazing ramp that you get from Hour of Promising into 2 Temple of the Forsaken Gods. So for basics for this deck, we've just got Forests and Islands, and then we have the package of cards that I thought should go in every deck like this: Grier Reach, Seagate Wreckage, and Mirror Pool. And then we've got just some basic ramp creatures, Channeler Initiate, Naga Vitalist, both tap for multiple colors of mana and can do it pretty repeatedly. I don't have an energy sub-theme in this deck, so Channeler Initiate just seems a lot better than Servant of the Conduit. Then we got Weaver of Currents just because of how efficient it is. It's 1 green-blue, and it can tap to add 2 colorless to your mana pool, which seems like a really good rate. I don't know why this card doesn't see more play, probably because creatures die to removal. Next up is Bounty of the Luxa. I liked this one specifically because it lets you draw a card on turn 5 rather than getting your ramp on turn 5, which means that you can make your land drop turn 5, play your Hour of Promise, and you get an extra card because you don't need that mana anyway. And then on your next turn, you have a ton of extra mana to play 1 or 2 Eldrazi's with. It gives you some freedom to go get a Sanctum of Ugin rather than a Temple of the Forsaken Gods, for instance. Hedron Archive, 4 tap to add 2 to your mana pool, or pay 2 and sack it to draw some cards, which is really nice. It's ramp when you need it, and then cards when you don't. Thought-Knot Seer is a 4/4 for 4, which lets you strip a card out of their hand. This is just in here because it's good, not because it's a ramp target specifically, and because it plays off of some of our colorless lands, which we have a pretty good abundance of in our mana base. Next, moving up the curve, we've got 4 Hour of Promise. No need to explain it, as I've already talked about it significantly in this video. And then we've got our big boys, our beefy ramp targets, starting with Conduit of Ruin, which, whenever you cast it, lets you search for another Eldrazi. You then put that on top of your library, and it'll be cheaper when you try to play it next turn. So this will be really useful for finding some of our specific Eldrazi's that we need in certain situations. And it kind of gives us the freedom to play answers in the main board, which is always kind of nice to do in a deck like this that does not have a lot of interaction. Next, we've got one of those answers, a single World Breaker. World Breaker hits artifacts, enchantments, and lands when it enters, and it also has Reach, which lets it play around flyers, and it can also be returned from your graveyard if you sacrifice lands to it. So overall, this is just a good card to hit with your Conduits of Ruin and your Sanctums of Ugin when you need it, and not have to worry about drawing when you don't because it's only a 1-of. Then we've got a couple of Elder Deep Fiends. I thought these were good enough to merit a 2-of because they come in handy in so many situations. They help you tap out your opponent's board, and they can emerge out of smaller creatures if necessary. Then we've got the points of the deck: Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger and Kozilek the Great Distortion. When Ulamog hits, he exiles permanents, and he quickly will exile your opponent's library. He's indestructible, so he's very hard to deal with, and exiling cards off the top of your opponent's library is a very strong way to end the game because it does not matter how many blockers they have. Kozilek the Great Distortion, on the other hand, refills your hand, has Menace, so it's hard to block, and lets you counter spells in a deck without counter spells. The only thing that we don't have, by the way, mana-wise, is 1-drops, so you're not going to be countering 1-drops. But at every other point in the curve, we're pretty solid. Even 2s, which will let you counter most of the removal that will be coming at Kozilek. And lastly, here are some just miscellaneous cards that I want to be in the deck, but I didn't really think of another place to put them. We've got Grasp of Tentacles, which will bounce the entire board and make you an 8/8 if you can activate Surge. Otherwise, it will just be a board clear that you'll play a little bit behind curve. And then Pull from Tomorrow, which lets you draw X cards and discard a card. Draw balls are always good in ramp decks. You can just fill up on answers real quick. And it's an instant, so you can do this end of turn while representing other things, which is always fun to do. So that's been the deck. I hope you enjoy it. There will definitely be some changes to this deck when Hour of Devastation actually comes out, but I am very interested in playing this online and seeing how it works. So, hope you enjoyed the video. Peace out.